The taxi rolled to a stop at the edge of a familiar gravel road, the road that led to the house I grew up in, the one I'd called home for 33 years. I stepped out, still in my uniform, desert dust from Kandahar clinging to every crease. My chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but also anticipation. After 11 months deployed in Afghanistan, I had lived for one goal: to come home early, unannounced, and surprise my mother. I pictured her bursting into tears, hands trembling as she set her tea down, then running to wrap her arms around me right there on the front porch steps. The white wooden house, the blue shutters, that little swing bench she adored. I had it all memorized, every detail. But what I saw in front of me was a dog park, yes, right on my land. A wooden sign swung from an iron fence. Willow Hill, Community Commons, sponsored by the Homeowners Association, HOA. Beneath it, a polished brass plaque read, "Dedicated to peace and neighborhood joy." I thought I'd gotten off at the wrong stop, but then I saw it. The old maple tree in the corner of the yard, the one still etched with JM plus MM, carved by my own hand the night before I shipped out. It was still there, still mine. But the rest of my front yard? Now a canine playground. 3 golden retrievers bounded after a frisbee on what used to be my living room floor. Some woman in yoga pants gave me a look like I was the trespasser, before scolding her poodle for sniffing. My military duffel bag. I stood frozen. A young couple strolled by, sipping smoothies, chatting and laughing. I asked them, "Excuse me, do you know where the house that used to be here went?" The man shrugged, as if I'd asked something trivial. I think it belonged to some government guy who didn't pay his taxes. HOA took it back and turned it into a park. Some government guy. They were talking about me. I'd crawled through mud and blood, carried wounded villagers, out of firefights, and now my own country had thrown me into a legal nightmare. On land I bled for. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was a hollowing silence, like someone had pulled out my heart without telling me. I'd survived IEDs, gunfire, nights so dark they swallowed time. But for the first time in my life, I didn't know what battlefield I was standing on. This enemy didn't carry rifles. They wore designer sunglasses, slip-on loafers, and held clipboards. And so I turned on my heel, to begin a war I never imagined I'd have to fight. The battle. To take back my home. I walked into City Hall like a pinball, bounced from one office to the next, from clerk to reception desk and back again. My property file, the one I remembered signing line by line, was now missing. Or worse, my name had been wiped from the system entirely. According to their records, I had forfeited ownership due to unpaid property taxes 6 months ago. The problem was, I had filed my military service tax exemption before I deployed. I had documentation, a federal case number. But the clerk at the counter just shrugged and said, "You'll probably want to speak to the HOA representative for Willow Hill." Her name was Karen Mallister, president of the HOA, a name that sounded like brass statues falling in slow motion. I found the HOA headquarters, an all-white clubhouse plopped in the middle of a neighborhood so neat it made Stepford look disorganized. The walls were lined with self-issued awards, outstanding civic leadership, suburban peace icon, and dead center, a giant framed portrait of Karen herself, arms akimbo, gaze like Napoleon surveying a putting green. When I arrived, Karen was in the middle of scolding a teenage boy for hanging LED string lights in his backyard, summer lights. To her, it might as well have been a declaration of civil disobedience punishable by exile. I stepped in, knocked gently on the desk. She didn't even look up. Not until I said slowly and clearly, "Excuse me, I'm John Ramirez. I used to own the home at 721 Willow Hill Drive." Only then did she lift her head, her expression like I'd personally insulted her day. Then came the smirk. That tight-lipped, condescending smile that made you want to punch the air just to relieve the tension. "Oh, that abandoned lot?" Yes, it was declared ownerless. Delinquent taxes, and the HOA assumed stewardship under Community Preservation Protocol. I explained about the military tax exemption, the paperwork I had filed. Before leaving the country, she cut me off mid-sentence, completely unfazed. Maybe you should have thought twice before running off to fight and leaving your responsibilities behind. Silence. The kind of silence that drops like a bullet chambering. She had just told a soldier to his face that he deserved to lose his home. I clenched my fists, swallowing the rage like I'd done 100 times under ambush. I reminded her that federal law protects active duty service members' property rights. She waved me off like flicking a fly. We could graciously offer you a lot at the far end of the community, near the waste center and overflow parking. Still, suitable for your situation. I said nothing else. Just nodded and walked out, leaving behind her vanity awards, the wine throne she sat on, and the woman wearing a paper crown carved from her own ego. That night, I didn't sleep. No dreams, no dozing, just emptiness. The cheap motel room outside town felt colder than concrete. I sat and stared at the blank wall, numb. It felt like being occupied, on the very soil I'd sworn to defend. This is the new battlefield, I thought. No bullets, no mortars, just fraud, forged papers, and people who believe the law bends around them. Tomorrow I will fight. And this time, I wouldn't need a weapon. I'd bring the truth. I woke before sunrise. Not that I'd slept. Something in my chest had shifted, like a dam giving way. And behind it, not rage, something colder. Focus. I pulled out my old phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Luis Ortega. He owed me a favor. Back in Kandahar, I dragged him out of a burning convoy under sniper fire. His lungs nearly collapsed that night. He survived. And now he works in cyber investigations for a federal agency. He picked up on the second ring. Cole? Yeah, I'm back. I need your help. Someone sold my land while I was deployed. Say less. Within hours, Luis was neck-deep in public databases. By lunch, he had already found the first red flag, retroactive board meeting minutes that didn't exist before last month. And they just happened to authorize the acquisition of unclaimed property. My property. By sundown, he mapped a spider web of forged signatures, falsified transfer notices, and shell corporations. At the center of that web, a man named Brent Mallister, Karen's cousin. Figures.Luis uncovered emails between board members laughing about how easy it was to flip the soldier's lot. One even jokes, he's probably dead anyway. If not, he'll salute and walk away. Another responded, HOA purity, no uniforms, no problems. I read those lines 10 times. Each word is like barbed wire sinking deeper into my gut. I'd faced death in uniform more times than I could count, but I never expected the dirtiest betrayal to come. Wrapped in pastel cardigans and homeowners' bylaws, they didn't just steal a house, they mocked the man who lived in it. They bet I'd never come back. Well, here I was. I printed the worst email, Karen herself, laughing about how one little bulldozer fixed the eyesore, and pinned it to the motel wall, right next to an old photo of my house, the porch. The swing my mom gave me, the flagpole I installed myself the week after her funeral. My home wasn't just lumber and nails. It was the last real piece of my life before the war, and they buried it in concrete and dog pee. Luis kept feeding me fire, satellite photos, building permits that never got issued, blueprints with forged county stamps. Karen's crew hadn't just taken my lot. They'd illegally expanded the subdivision. Some homes now sat halfway into protected wetlands. A utility shed was built on a sewer easement. Even their shiny new clubhouse? 6 inches onto municipal land. I didn't just have a case. I had an arsenal, but lawsuits would take years, and Karen knew how to drown people in legal sludge. I needed leverage, loud, public, and undeniable. That's when I remembered something Colonel Trent said during our last deployment. If things ever go sideways back home and you need something, call me, direct. I had never used that card. Until now. I called him, told him everything. He didn't laugh, didn't hesitate. Send me coordinates, he said. and a list of structures involved. Then came the question, you want this quiet or dramatic? I didn't flinch. Dramatic, he chuckled. Then let's remind these suburban tyrants what a real operation looks like. That night, I stared at the motel ceiling, adrenaline humming in my veins like a second heartbeat. The war was no longer overseas. It was here, and I was done playing by their rules. It began with a whisper. While the residents of Willow Hill were busy trimming hedges and bickering over mailbox paint codes, I was neck-deep in military blueprints, zoning maps, and satellite overlays. Luis had stayed up all night with me, digging deeper into the HOA's infrastructure like a digital archaeologist uncovering layers of rot. Every house, every fence line, every paved-over square inch told a story of quiet theft. The subdivision wasn't just built on arrogance, it was built on fraud. I handed the data packet off to Colonel Trent with precise coordinates, elevation readings, structural inventories, and municipal inconsistencies. He whistled when he saw the scope of it. We're not just talking about your lot, he said. This is a swamp of zoning violations, environmental encroachments, and municipal overreach. I nodded. Good. Then let's turn it into a battlefield. On paper, he smirked. 3 days later, the plan was approved. Operation Civic Shield. It sounded like a PR campaign for storm drains, but behind that cheesy name was a full-blown federal training exercise. The kind that requires top-level approval, tactical maps, and boots on contested ground. Why? Because, as long as the land's ownership was in question, and the documents showed clear signs of tampering, the military had the legal right to conduct urban training simulations there, with full civilian cooperation, which meant we were coming, back, in uniform, on my land, with the full weight of the United States military. The morning of the operation was still and warm, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking the world is at peace. But peace doesn't ride in on Humvees and helicopters. I sat in an unmarked SUV at the edge of town, watching as the first wave of vehicles rolled into Willow Hill. Soldiers in fatigue uniforms moved with purpose, laying out cordons, unfurling tactical mesh, marking boundaries with GPS-guided stakes. The first residents stepped outside in robes, and slippers, coffee mugs shaking in confused hands. They stared at the rows of military trucks now lining their perfect cul-de-sacs. Karen hadn't emerged yet. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. From my perch, I watched engineers hammering metal stakes into her community walking path, right between the roses and the yoga circle stones. Luis texted me one word: showtime. I got out of the SUV, my boots, hitting pavement like a declaration. A Black Hawk helicopter circled once and began its descent toward the HOA's meditation garden. That space had been built illegally over a municipal runoff zone. The moment the chopper's rotors kicked up pedals and mulch, a ripple of panic spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Karen finally emerged. She wore a silky bathrobe and clutched a mug that read, Queen Bee of the Hill. Her hair was a mess of overnight curlers and half-hearted pride. She blinked twice as she stepped out onto her porch and saw her kingdom occupied. Soldiers were already erecting tents in what used to be my front yard. She stormed down the lawn, heels digging, into grass like bayonets. What is the meaning of this? She bellowed. She cornered an officer directing gear placement near the community fountain. He was calm. She had a Category 5 tantrum. He handed her a sealed envelope. She tore it open and scanned the pages. Federal Assessment Notice, Joint Operations. Protocol, temporary military occupation approved. Land dispute under investigation. The pink rage drained from her face, replaced with pale confusion. Her lips curled. She tried to argue something about property rights and neighborhood sovereignty, but no one was listening. A soldier politely offered her a Department of Defense contact number for complaints. Then he walked off. I waited a beat before stepping into view. Karen spotted me immediately, her mouth twisted like she'd bitten into battery acid. You, she hissed, eyes wild. This is your doing. That land you stole, I said. It's coming back to me, piece by piece. She gestured wildly at the survey flags and zoning markers. "You have no right. This is protected HOA land." I stepped closer. "When's the last time you had those property lines verified by the county? Because according to these," I held up a stack of maps, "half your subdivision is built on misfiled permits and lies." Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Within hours, the military had converted the community clubhouse into a command post. Karen tried to lock herself inside, but the soldiers had a master key, courtesy of the county, who apparently still had jurisdiction over the locks. The wine fridge was emptied, replaced with bottled water and MREs. Her propaganda posters were quietly removed. One young officer even turned Karen's own living room into a tactical map room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. That afternoon, I walked through what was once my yard. The foundation had been cleared and marked with care by respectful soldiers. They knew it meant something. They'd been there too. Returned home to ghosts and strangers and something missing they couldn't name. I stood in the center and whispered to no one. "You thought I'd never come back. But I did. And I brought the whole damn cavalry." By mid-morning, the sound of power tools and military radio chatter echoed through every cul-de-sac in Willow Hill. Residents emerged like confused ants, drawn by the rumble of engines and the low chop of helicopter blades still circling above. What they saw was a sight no HOA meeting could have prepared them for. Their meticulously manicured suburb had become a fully operational training ground. Troops marched in formation. Drones buzzed overhead. Camouflage tents popped up like mushrooms across the communal green space. And at the center of it all, the once pristine clubhouse now bore a new sign taped to the door. Temporary Command Center, property under federal review. Inside, soldiers pored over satellite images and ownership records. Luis had brought the whole playbook, forged documents, manipulated votes, fraudulent contractor receipts. One young lieutenant shook his head in disbelief. They really thought no one would notice? I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. They thought I'd never come home. Karen hadn't stopped storming since sunrise. She marched up and down sidewalks in her pearls and house slippers, shrieking into a Bluetooth headset, waving her queen bee mug like it was a scepter. Most calls went to voicemail, a few to lawyers. None returned her cries. She tried to hold a press conference near the Subdivision's stone entrance sign, the same one that now had military caution tape wrapped around it. Microphones were shoved into her face. She fumbled through a statement. "This is an illegal overreach. A witch hunt. The HOA acted in good faith." But when a reporter cut her off and asked, "Why was a veteran's home bulldozed during deployment?" her voice cracked, her expression buckled, her mask slipped, and the camera didn't blink. That night, the footage aired on 3 local channels and was clipped for TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, you name it. Within hours, hashtags like "Sought Justice for Ramirez" and "Bye Bye Karen" were trending across the country. A split screen of my old cottage next to the dog park they built over it went viral, the kind of image that punches people in the heart before their brain has a chance to catch up. People were furious. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, even a few local city council members who once cozied up to Karen were now sprinting away from her name like it was radioactive. Back at the HOA compound, if you could still call it that, residents were no longer silent. Some walked with signs, homemade, hurried, furious. "Where's our money?" HOA, House of Arrogance. "Rebuild the vet's home." Karen's former supporters tried to muster a defense. They shouted about decorum and due process while standing next to camouflaged soldiers scanning soil samples. Didn't exactly carry the same weight. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting, and she dragged out a folding table and a $20 megaphone from the clubhouse storage closet, set herself up near the fountain, and began reading a shaky speech from trembling hands. "This community must stand united. We are the heart of Willow Hill. This intrusion will not stand." I could see the panic behind her eyes, the cornered look of someone who built their throne on paper and just realized it's all soaking wet. Before she could finish, a uniformed officer stepped out from the command center and walked over. Calm, direct, no fuss. He placed an envelope on her little plastic table. Karen looked at it like it was ticking. Inside, a formal letter from the Federal Land Review Board. It declared that due to documented fraud, forgery, and obstruction of veteran protections, the Willow Hill HOA was suspended indefinitely. No more meetings, no more fines, no more fake authority. The HOA was dead, a beat of silence. Then the sound I didn't expect, cheering from the crowd, from neighbors, from people who'd been silent for too long. One man, graying hair, old USMC hat, walked up and shook my hand. Should have happened years ago, he said. Another woman, holding back tears, whispered, "She fined us $300 for planting the wrong flowers. I'm so sorry for what they did to you." I nodded. It's not about me anymore. It's about all of us. Luis wasn't done. He found video footage from a closed-door HOA meeting, one Karen thought had never been recorded. In it, she sneered at my name, called my house an eyesore, and bragged about how easy it was to bury someone's legacy when they're overseas. I sent the video to the press with one line, "I'm home now." The next 24 hours were a landslide. Federal subpoenas were issued. Karen's cousin, the shell company frontman, was indicted for fraud and tax evasion. The contractor who bulldozed. My house rolled over fast, handing over email chains that made the whole operation look like a mob job with manicured lawns. Karen? Her law firm dropped her. Her social circle evaporated. Even her favorite winery, the one that sponsored her, Little HOA Gala last year, issued a public statement. "We stand with our veterans." By sundown, her kingdom wasn't just crumbling, it was ash. And through it all, I stood quietly in the middle of what used to be my front yard. The foundation was outlined with flag markers. One of the soldiers handed me a clipboard. "If you want us to help rebuild, we've got a few engineers who'd be honored to mark the dimensions. From photos, we can get it right." I looked down at the plans. There it was, my porch swing, my mother's chair, the window with the crooked shutter I never fixed. I swallowed hard and nodded. Let's bring it home. They say justice moves slowly. But sometimes, when the stars align and the evidence is ironclad, it moves like a freight train. By the time the military tents were fully set up and command lines secured, the real operation had already begun. Audit inside what was once Karen Mallister's kingdom, a clubhouse she decorated like Versailles with HOA slogans and passive-aggressive signage, investigators from the Department of Defense, the IRS, and the Office of Federal Property. Right set up shop, clipboards clicked, flash drives whirred. Files were pulled from dusty cabinets Karen thought no one would ever open. Luis stood in the middle of it all, orchestrating with the cool efficiency of someone who'd spent a decade chasing digital ghosts. "They kept everything," he muttered, sifting through a stack of sealed boxes. Emails, receipts, fake ballots, even notes from rigged elections. One folder was labeled non-compliant lots. Inside, names, photos, punitive actions taken against homeowners for violations that barely qualified as mistakes. One, guy got fined for wind chimes, Luis said. Another for using the wrong shade of mulch. I clenched my fists, not because of the chimes, but because of how many people gave up without ever fighting back. That's what HOA bullies like Karen thrive on. Silence, intimidation, compliance masked as community. Not anymore. News travels fast. Local outlets turned national. Veterans. Groups hosted live-stream panels. Even daytime talk shows picked up the headline, "Veteran returns from deployment to find home, replaced by dog park, then brings military with him." Karen's face was everywhere. Mid-yell, mid-meltdown, mid-denial. The footage of her waving her mug and screaming about neighborhood sovereignty had been turned into memes, reaction GIFs, even a TikTok dance remix. But this wasn't just public humiliation anymore. This was criminal. Investigators found 5 more properties in Willow Hill that had been transferred under questionable circumstances. The same forged signatures. The same adverse possession claims based on fake abandonment. And all of them tied back to shell companies controlled by Karen's cousin or her advisory board, a group of HOA loyalists who signed off on every shady deal. Karen's bank records were subpoenaed. Multiple wire transfers showed payouts to an unlicensed contractor, the same one who bulldozed my house, just days before the community beautification project was announced. One check memo read, "Clearing lot behind Dog Run, rush job." The lies were unraveling fast. Back outside, the neighborhood was in full panic mode. Families who once bragged about secure property values now whispered about title fraud and unauthorized zoning. A few packed their cars and left before federal review teams could even knock on their doors. Others tried to argue with soldiers stationed at the perimeter lines. One man shouted, "This is unconstitutional." A staff sergeant calmly replied, "So was selling a veteran's land without notice." Some just stood there, quiet, ashamed, guilty without being guilty. Inside the old clubhouse, now renamed Forward Ops Base Ramirez by the soldiers, half as a joke, half as tribute, I met with the federal legal liaison assigned to the case. A stone-faced woman from the Department of Housing Oversight. She didn't waste time. "Mr. Ramirez, I've reviewed your case file. Your exemption status was valid. Your property was seized illegally. What happened here isn't just negligence. It's conspiracy and fraud." I said nothing, just nodded. "You're entitled to damages, potential restitution. Criminal charges are pending against at least 4 members of the HOA board. But the money didn't matter. I didn't want their checks. I wanted the truth on the record. I wanted every person in Willow Hill to read what happened, to feel it. By the end of the week, the clubhouse garage had yielded dozens of boxes of shredded documents. HOA complaint letters never responded to, ballots never counted, even payment records showing compliance fees funneled into private accounts. The nail in the coffin came from a USB drive Luis recovered from a laptop labeled HOA Communications. Inside, a voice memo from Karen herself recorded late one night. "We had to get rid of that soldier's house. It was a blot on the neighborhood. No way was I letting a uniformed poster boy lower property values. He's just one guy. What can he do, sue us from a foxhole?" I listened to it twice, then sent it straight to the Department of Justice. Karen's world collapsed with a whisper. Her lawyer quit. Her cousin lawyered up. The shady contractor flipped within 24 hours, handing over internal emails and payment receipts. He even led agents to a storage unit filled with HOA furniture, unused compliance notices, and a literal shredder with burned papers inside. She never saw it coming. And that's the thing about people like Karen. They think they can control the story, the vote, the rules. But not this time. Not with me watching. That evening, I stood with Luis on the edge of the property that used to be mine. The soldiers had cleared the ground, mapped the foundation, and marked the corners of my future. Home. It wasn't just dirt anymore. It was truth. "You know," Luis said, "this whole place is going to be studied for years. It's a perfect example of small-scale tyranny getting burned down by one guy with a spine." I chuckled. One guy with a spine and some backup. He grinned. We both knew it wasn't over yet. There were hearings coming, depositions, more charges, more homes to investigate. But the tide had turned. The HOA empire had cracked from the inside out, and tomorrow I'd finally hold the hammer. By the time dawn broke on the 10th day of Operation Civic Shield, Willow Hill didn't look like a neighborhood anymore. It looked like a war zone that had never fired a single bullet. Checkpoints stood at all 3 entrances. Uniformed officers walked the sidewalks with clipboards and digital maps. Drones scanned rooftops, engineers took soil samples, and Karen hadn't come outside in 2 days. Word was she'd barricaded herself inside her once grand Tudor-style house. Blinds drawn, internet scrubbed, and phone lines overloaded with voicemails from attorneys no longer returning her calls. She was trapped inside a glass castle with no moat left to protect her. That morning, I stood near the entrance to what used to be the dog park. Where my porch once stood, the land had been cleared. Fresh chalk lines marked the perimeter. I could still see it. The swing my mom loved, the porch light that flickers every other Thursday, the American flag I used to raise every Memorial Day. This was mine. Again. And it was only the beginning. Arriba. 9:02 a.m., the first set of eviction notices went out, not in secret, not quietly, but by hand, served with military escort and backed by federal order. 11 homes. Each one built on land that had been acquired through forged documents, manipulated vote counts, or outright theft. I watched from the command center as residents opened manila envelopes with shaking hands. Some shouted, some cried. A few just sat down on their porch steps and stared into space like they'd been unplugged from reality. But the instructions were clear. Your structure is not being seized. Your land is now under federal investigation. You must provide proof of legal ownership within 30 days or vacate the premises. Most couldn't. One by one, Karen's allies began to crumble. First was Tom Ridgewell, the HOA treasurer and Karen's longtime enforcer. The same man who fined people for lawn ornaments and non-regulation garden gnomes. Turns out, he was living in a house built on wetland easement, a house he helped approve through a fake zoning subcommittee that didn't exist. He packed up before lunchtime, didn't even bother to argue. Then came the Sorensens, retirees who once led the HOA's Aesthetic Preservation Committee. They tried to claim ignorance, but the emails Luis uncovered showed them voting yes on land swaps in exchange for fee waivers and landscaping discounts. "We didn't know," they pleaded. "You signed off on it," the federal agent replied. Box by box, their things were loaded into a U-Haul. Karen, though, she refused to go down quietly. At 1:14 p.m., she emerged, not with humility, not with remorse, but with a folding table and a megaphone. She dragged it to the edge of the subdivision and shouted into the void like a woman on a sinking ship demanding the tide retreat. "This is my neighborhood. I built this. You can't just come in here with tanks and take over private property." A few residents gathered, not to support her, to watch. And that's when the final blow landed. A federal liaison from the Department of Veteran Affairs stepped forward with a document in hand. "Ms. Mallister," she said calmly, "this letter informs you that due to findings of criminal fraud, conspiracy to defraud a service member, and obstruction of federal housing protections, your home is now classified as part of the disputed zone." Karen Blink. "You're evicting me? You'll have 48 hours to present documentation proving a clean title. If not, the property will be held under federal review, pending final disposition." Karen tried to scream something. Probably. About her rights or her history, or how she was the founding mother of Willow Hill. But her voice was drowned out. Not by soldiers. Not by sirens. By clapping. Dozens of neighbors, people she'd once fined, threatened, silenced, now stood with coffee mugs in hand and relief on their faces. One woman held up a sign made from a pizza box that read, "We stand with Ramirez." Karen spun around, hoping someone, anyone, would come to her defense, but her power wasn't just gone. It had evaporated. Later that afternoon, I walked through the neighborhood with Luis. The air was different now, still tense, but also lighter. People stepped outside and waved. Not nervously, not out of obligation, but genuinely. Kids were riding bikes again. A dog barked happily without being ticketed for leash length. One older man stopped us and said, "Never thought I'd see the day. We always thought she was untouchable." Luis nodded. Everyone's untouchable, until they're not. Back at the clubhouse, which now served as an open archive for the investigation, federal agents continued to catalog the evidence. Bank records, handwritten notes, even a hidden file titled Karen's Rules, which outlined how to discourage undesirable elements from moving into the community, including active-duty military, single mothers, and unlicensed tradespeople. It wasn't just HOA policy, it was discrimination. With a smile. That night, I stood once again on the marked foundation of my home. A local builder, himself a veteran, had stopped by earlier and handed me a roll of blueprints. He offered to rebuild the house, no charge, with materials donated, By local businesses and labor volunteered by neighbors. Just let me be the guy who nails the porch swing, he said. Every hero needs a place to sit. I didn't cry. Not out loud. But for the first time since I'd landed back in this town, I felt something return to my chest. Weight. Presence. Home. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over what used to be Karen's domain, I looked out over the land she tried to steal and smiled. You built a fake kingdom, I whispered, but this land was never yours to rule. They say the greatest victories are the quiet ones, the ones without parades, without speeches, without fireworks. I didn't need a crowd. All I needed was a hammer. That morning, the soldiers had packed up their gear. Operation Civic Shield was officially complete. The tents came down, the checkpoints cleared. But what they left behind wasn't just wheel ruts and survey flags, it was a shift in power. Karen McAllister was gone. She'd left in the dead of night, her SUV stuffed with boxes, her legacy reduced to memes and subpoena dates. Her cousin was already under federal indictment. Her cronies? Cooperating. The HOA was dissolved by federal order. Its records were seized, its bylaws shredded. In its place, a new civic association was forming, voluntary, transparent, and neighbor-led. They asked me to take a seat on the founding committee. I declined. I didn't fight to be in charge, I told them. I fought to be left alone. But I did offer one thing, a clause. The Ramirez Clause. A permanent protection for active duty military and veterans against any housing action taken without federal review. No more fines, no more shady votes, no more bulldozers while someone's dodging bombs overseas. They voted unanimously to include it. I spent that afternoon with a team of volunteers, people who once feared Karen, now freely walking my land, with measuring tape and wheelbarrows. Some brought food, others brought tools. One elderly woman placed a hand on my shoulder and said through tears, "We're sorry we didn't speak up sooner." I told her what I told all of them. It's not about what you didn't do then. It's about what you're doing now. Rebuilding. Wasn't easy, but it wasn't lonely either. The community pitched in. The Department of Veterans Affairs pledged a rebuilding grant. And donations poured in from across the country, from strangers, from soldiers, from people who saw their own fight in mine. They didn't just give money, they gave weight to what was taken. They gave proof that truth still had defenders. Luis stayed longer than planned, said he wanted to see it through. He even helped redraw the original house plans from photos, down to the crooked kitchen window and the porch swing that faced the road. We'll hang it last, I said. When it's done. One quiet morning, as the foundation was poured and the first walls went up, I walked to the exact center of what used to be my living room. I drove a wooden sign into the ground. With my own two hands, it read, "This land has been reclaimed with honor." Beneath it, the names of my mother and my unit. One of the builders handed me a nail. Want to do the honors? I did. I knelt beside the porch beam, the exact spot where my mother once hung wind chimes no HOA could ever regulate, and drove, in the first nail, thwack. It echoed not as destruction, but as resurrection. Weeks passed. Karen's house, now under federal review, was stripped of its throne room aesthetic. It would serve temporarily as a public record center for housing fraud cases. Boxes pulled from her garage revealed everything. Voting tampering. Targeted fines, shredded letters, expense reports that read like a personal vacation log. It wasn't just a fall from grace. It was the burial of a tyrant in beige slacks. The neighborhood slowly healed. Kids played in yards again without fear of clipboard spies. Neighbors shared tools, planted gardens in any damn color they pleased. Flags went up, not out of defiance but out of belonging. And every evening, when the wind slowed and the sky turned gold, I'd sit on that half-built porch and watch. A community breathe free for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was ours. One day, a local reporter returned. He asked me, "What do you think finally brought her down?" I didn't have to think long. Entitlement. I said. She thought nobody would fight back. He asked if I felt vindicated. I looked at the house, the wood frame rising where my childhood memories had once been bulldozed, and said, I'm not here to feel anything. I'm here to rebuild. And rebuild I did. The swing went up last. Hung it at dusk, just as the crickets started to sing and the cicadas fell quiet. I sat down, let it creak gently beneath me, and looked out at the land that was once stolen, now restored. No more protests, no more flags, no more courtrooms, just a porch swing, swaying in the wind, and peace. Hard-earned, long overdue. They sold my land while I was deployed, so I brought the truth back with me, and took their entire world with it. This war is over, and I won, with honor, with justice, with one nail at a time.